Peace, and welcome to another episode of the Quranic Remedies, where we spend about 15 minutes exploring a page from the Quran together and seeing how we can apply the verses to our lives. And hopefully, with God's permission, it helps us heal our brain, body, mind, and soul. So today we'll be reading from chapter 4, The Women, from verses 114 to 121. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. I seek refuge to God from the accursed devil. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, the gracious, the merciful. لا خير في كثير من نجواهم إلا من أمر بصدقة أو معروف أو إصلاح بين الناس ومن يفعل ذلك ابتغاء مرضات الله فسوف نؤتيه أجرا عظيما. There's no good in much of their private counsels, except for him who advocates charity or kindness or reconciliation between people. Whoever does that seeking God's approval, we will give him a great compensation. ومن يشاقق الرسول من بعد ما تبين له الهدى ويتبع غير سبيل المؤمنين نوله ما تولى ونصليه جهنم وساءت مصيرا. Whoever makes a breach with the messenger after the guidance has become clear to him and follows other than the path of the believers, we will direct him in the direction he has chosen and commit him to hell. What a terrible destination. إن الله لا يغفر أن يشرك به ويغفر ما دون ذلك لمن يشاء ومن يشرك بالله فقد ضل ضلالا بعيدا. God will not forgive that partners be associated with him, but will forgive anything less than that to whomever he wills. Anyone who ascribes partners to God has strayed into far error. إن يدعون من دونه إلا إناثا وإن يدعون إلا شيطانا مريدا. They invoke in his stead only females. In fact, they invoke none but a rebellious devil. لعنه الله. وقال لأتخذنا من عبادك نصيبا مفروضا. God has cursed him. And the devil said, and he said, I will take to myself my due share of your servants. وَلِأَضَلَّنَّهُمْ وَلِأُمَنِّيَنَّهُمْ وَلِأَمَرْنَهُمْ فَلْيُبْتِكِنَّ أَذَانِ الْأَنْعَامِ وَلِأَمَرَّنَّهُمْ فَلْيُغَيِّرْنَ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ وَمَنْ يَتَّخِذِ الشَّيْطَانَ وَلِيًّا مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ فَقَدْ خَسِرَ خُسْرَانًا مُبِينًا. And I will mislead them, and I will entice them, and I will prompt them to slit the ears of cattle, and I will prompt them to alter the creation of God. Whoever takes Satan as a lord instead of God has surely suffered a profound loss. يعدهم ويمنيهم وما يعدهم الشيطان إلا غرورا. He promises them and he raises their expectation, but Satan promises them nothing but delusions. أولئك مأواهم جهنم ولا يجدون عنها محيصا. These, their places is hell, and they will find no escape from it. Sadaqallahu al-Azim. God the Great said the truth. Now we were talking about a group of people who they are supposedly among the believers. They are quick to defend people that are indefendable. They do not stand for justice. And they also have characteristics of throwing innocent people under the fire when they commit a sin. Now, God states that some of these people, they're a faction of those people, these hypocrites, these liars, as this chapter talked about hypocrites extensively, these individuals, they will come together and they will do groups and factions to try to delude not only the believers, but also the messenger. And if it wasn't for God's favor, people would have got deluded. So here we clearly see that they have these private councils and they're actively working in trying to delude the people who have believed. They have these plans that they try to come together and to try to achieve, but majority of it does not come to fruition, especially if somebody's loyal to God. Now, God does give us an exception. There are people that are within that group that are planning, but yet they are not considering the people in front of them as disbelievers. They're part of those meetings, they're part of those councils, but yet they have not recognized this hypocrisy that these people have. So they're there to try to advocate for charity. They are trying to advocate for kindness and to reconcile between the people. This is something that you should find yourself doing every time you sit in a position where somebody is talking about someone else or they're talking about a different movement in where you personally understand that movement has some basis within what God wants from us. Yes, you want to advocate for goodness and you want to advocate for people to reconcile, and some things that are not reconcilable, but yet we want to try to push people to do the right thing. So if someone is not capable of breaking their programming, for example, in a Trinitarian Christian, it is not wise and it's not smart to keep arguing with that individual in regards to how Jesus is not part of a part of 1 out of 3 of God, because that conversation is not going to be fruitful, especially in that person has denied what you told them and you have extensively talked about it. But now what you could try to do, which is helpful, is to try to remind that person of what God and what Jesus allegedly said in regards to being good to your neighbors, to take care of your parents, to be good to people around you, to think about the hereafter, that you have a common enemy. So you try to find the things that are common within the people's morals in regards to what they have in their books and what you have in your books, and this is where you want to remind. Christians do believe in charity and they do advocate for people to give from what God has given them. So this is a focus point that you can do. And the other thing that you can do in those private councils is try to teach people that, yes, just because the Christians don't see eye to eye in regard, Trinitarian Christians cannot see eye to eye in regards to how God is and the Godhead in their books. But what you can see eye to eye is that you can get along as long as you don't open that topic up and discuss that topic, because obviously they've been hearing about it for 1400 years and they've not been able to break that programming. Now, one thing that we have also been shown to us, that there are people who are clearly seeing the guidance among the messenger, among the believers, that this guidance is extremely clear. A good example is this, is the ones that claim that they follow the traditions of the Prophet, or Sunnat al-Rasul, as they call themselves Sunnis. I know these episodes, I usually don't try to target individuals. I'm just giving a simple example, is that when people who have the book in front of them, who have the Quran in front of them, when they are presented to the verses to be applied in what we see in this day and age, they're capable of recognizing the truth and they want to argue. And this argumentation is truly where I see this verse being applied. Because of the path of believers has always been the same path. It's the straight path that God has given us. And the thing that people do not understand is that this way that God has shown us to be who we are, it is something that is almost innate in the person, as long as the person is being honest to what he sees and honest to his mindset and honest to what God has shown him. Because this honesty leads you to the same path. It does not matter where you're getting the information from, whether it's the gospel, whether it's the Torah, whether it's the Quran. If you're a person who is wholeheartedly understanding you as a human being, you're supposed to have this relationship with your Lord, and your Lord is a good God, and therefore you need to reflect that goodness that God has shown you into your life and into what others are supposed to perceive from you, and not be a faker, not be a hypocrite, but rather be somebody who's genuinely trying and being a good person, then you would see that this is the path that God has chosen for the believers. If someone is clearly articulating these points and you can clearly see that he's guided, that he's aware of the day of judgment, he's aware that God is his Lord, he's aware that God is the one who decides, and he's aware of the messengers and the angels, and he's living in his life in accordance to what God has ordered in his book, then at that point you have absolutely no right to try to take that person down, especially when his actions are matching his words. And this is where God's stating that individuals that want to target such people, they have what they have chosen, this path of pain and hell, because you are clearly opposing the messenger and the believers, and you're choosing other than what God has chosen for the human beings. Now, I understand earlier I said that God does not forgive, that Trinitarian Christians, there is a way for us to find common ground. Those individuals in their minds, they believe that it's a monotheistic approach to religion, but it can be proven that it's not because of just pure logic and reasons. But just due to the person truly believing that it's a monotheistic religion and that he still admits that it's one God that they say that he made up as 3 parts, this falls under the category of attributing partners to God. There are people that are actively attributing partners, calling things God, that there is no connection. There are people who are actively talking about polytheism. Those are the worst of the example. There are people who are deluded in their religion that commit shirk, that commit idolatry, and they associate to God what God has not allowed for it to be associated to him. those individuals are going to get punished, because this is the second time where we read about this verse. And I already told you that individuals can get punished here on this earth, not necessarily for the hereafter. But the thing that we have to understand is that there are people who are going to get punished in the hereafter for their crimes, despite them believing in God. But the fact that they keep associating things to God is the problem. Because when you're associating things to God, you are going on a path, you are going on a mindset that is going to hurt you and hurt the people around you. This is why it's not a healthy path. This is why it's not forgivable, and it is truly a cancer and a poison to your society. Well, God is giving us now more insight in regards to a certain enemy that we have, a devil. This devil comes to you trying to pretend that he's a girl. It's just because he is thinking about subjugating you. He wants to humiliate you. He wants you to ascribe him and think of him as a god. He himself will not say that he's a god. He is too scared of God to say such words, but he will come to you and you would think so. So let's assume somebody hears a voice in his head, and that man is a Trinitarian Christian. And that voice, that whisper that came, the man's thought was Jesus, and the devil in his head would say, well, if that's what you think, then it is what you want. So the devil himself never called himself Jesus, but rather he just went off the man's delusions, and he never corrected the man's delusions. And then that individual starts to listen to the voice in their head, yet that voice in their head is a scorned devil. Now notice how the humiliation is even deeper than that, because we have levels and we have degrees. And if a man subjugates himself below a woman, in our day and age we call that simping, which is something that is frowned upon. And where the man seems weak, it's just because God has favored or given a degree to the man over a woman. So in the concepts of dominance, a man should not be dominated by a lady. Yes, a lady can have a leadership position, but it's not where the man is now under worship and under servitude of a woman. Seeing God as a woman is something that's extremely, extremely twisted. Because you as a man, you're going to end up sexualizing this goddess that you are putting in your mind. So the devil, to subjugate you, he's coming to you as a female if you're a male. And this is where God is telling us that they are talking to an actual devil, yet they are thinking they're calling them on females. So let's take these examples of the Greek mythology, where the goddess of victory in their books is Nike. Obviously, that's falsehood, because God gives the victory to whom he wants, and God is only one. But Nike is a female, and there are people that call upon Nike. But the devil can come to your voice and start to whisper in your head, and people back then would have assumed that Nike answered them. But then they start to push into something where they start to take this as a muse, where she, this fake goddess, is something that they wholeheartedly worship in their hearts, in regards to even wanting to physically feel that worship. And it's very gross and it's disgusting. This is something that is actually reflected in this age where sexualized content is very readily available. You notice people start to say to these ladies that post themselves inappropriately, they start to call them goddesses and such nature. Because one of the disease of a male is that when he falls into polytheism and idolatry, and it's a goddess that he's talking to, that disease is going to grow into lust. And he's going to start to mess in his brain in regards to these situations, where unfortunately it involves what he is calling as a god. So this is where the devil subjugates people to a level where it's extremely gross. And God is telling us about this conversation, where the devil has said to God that I'm going to try to take a portion of your people, that he is going to delude them, he's going to entice them, he's going to give them promises. He's going to try to change the system of God. He's trying to change the creation of God. So if God created you a male, he's going to want you to change into a female. This is changing what God has created. There are concepts of decoration where you're not changing what God has given you. You're decorating what God has given you, and to a certain degree that's permissible. But there are times where you are clearly changing your body, changing who you are, changing what God has clearly has created. This is also in regards to plants and this biodiversity that we see in front of us, where individuals think that they have the right to modify what God has given us. And this modification is changing what God has clearly created. There's going to be a downfall for it. So all these individuals that change their bodies in a way that God has not created you, or they're changing these seeds that God has not raised, in the very long run, we could see that it's actually extremely harmful for you as a person, because you're going to reach an age where whatever changes you did, your body is no longer reflected, and you're going to need to keep putting yourself under the knife. Meanwhile, the plants that you are growing they're genetically modified. We're seeing the health risks in the way that these plants are not growing the way that they need to be, but they look very well. But it's not about looking very well. It's about what God has chosen for us, because these impurities that we have around us is part of life. And to be shooting for this perfection and modifying God's way, or what God has created for this perfection, is only going to cause more failure and more harm. Because it's only these promises that you get in your head from this devil that God has cursed. And if you're going to obey somebody that's cursed, then you yourself will also get cursed. This is something that we always have to keep in our head. Here as well, God is giving us an example of how the devil orders people to change the creation of God. Slitting the ears of the cattle is just so that the cattle gets programmed differently. We could also see this on how they do it to dogs and certain people in certain places. They would cut the ear of a dog, and if they want the dog to be vicious, they would feed it its own ear. This is clearly changing what God has programmed. This is going against what God has wanted for this world to do. God's giving you the ability does not mean that you have the permission to do so. You are not going by the will of God, and you're just going by the ability that God has allowed you to have. But it does not mean that you're not going to get punished for these things. This devil we can clearly see around us. This devil right now is working overtime, where he's promising people things and money and fame and fortune and these lifestyles which is imbued with sexual derogatory actions and this degeneracy that we constantly see. And it's always about identifying as things as you're not, yet he's always trying to put you into these boxes so that you can always be at someone else's throat, yet you don't know that person. And as God states that whoever takes Satan as a Lord, notice the word here, Lord. Lord is the one who's dictating to you what's going on in front of you. And whoever does take Satan as a Lord has surely been lost. Satan is just promising them, and he's raising their expectation. All those promises are not going to come to fruition. And this is something that's going to be presented to us on a day of judgment. It's extremely clear, where Satan is going to tell us, like, God has promised you, and he promised you the truth, and I promised you, and I lied to you. So don't blame me, blame yourself. And as I said earlier, Satan comes to you and he just feeds off your own preconceived delusions anyways. The reason why Satan was capable of maneuvering you is because you were already deluded. So when you heard a voice in your head, you said Jesus. So you thought that Jesus was God. And the devil just went along with what you were saying. Does not mean that he agreed with you, but he used it against you. So how many times has the devil used what you think against you just to confirm what you're saying to yourself, thinking it's the truth? And unfortunately, when people who are a little bit more wiser than those people that fall into those traps, they tend to not be able to listen to the person who's coming to them with the truth, because they've taken Satan as an ally. They've taken him as a Lord. They've taken him as the one who dictates to them the truth. And if you fall in that trap, you're very difficult to recover unless you start to accept that you've become an ally to the devil. Because many people are allies to the devil. They don't even know it, because they don't reflect on their own thoughts and their own history. And they tend to forget most of the troubles that they do. And they just keep falling from one hole to another, thinking that they're good people. With that said, hope you guys are enjoying these. All praise to the Lord of the worlds. Peace be upon you.